Pastor Gary, Calvary Chapel. We're glad you're with us as we are going off-road into the Scriptures. We go off-road each week on Sunday morning. We are going through the books of the Bible, all 66. And so we've entitled that time to be our Study 66. And when we come together on this supplemental time, this is off-road. We kind of dig in a little deeper. Well, this coming week, we are going to delve into the book of what we call the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, listen, there's no doubt about it that the conversation that happens in the Song of Songs is like a PG-13, maybe depending on how it's presented and what's said. I find it to be a beautiful, beautiful poetic piece, but some people look at it a little differently. And there's no doubt there's an analogy that runs through it. There's a picture that it paints, I think, that is a couple other levels, and which much of the Scripture does, by the way. And I think that we see Jesus in this. I think we see the bride, the church in this. But there's no doubt we also see a man and a woman who are definitely in love. It endorses the idea of marriage. There's no doubt about it. I think it may be one of the strongest proponents of marriage in the Scriptures that we can share with the world that we live today. When people say, well, what about this idea of marriage? What about this idea of a man and a woman? Well, you can take them to the Song of Solomon and certainly present a biblical case for that particular view. There's no doubt about it. Well, let's get started. Solomon, of course, is the writer of the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs. In fact, it tells us that basically in the very first verse we get that. And what it means when it says the Song of Songs is literally Solomon is attributed with writing just slightly over 1,000 songs. And this one being called the Song of Songs simply just means it is his best work, referred to as his best work. And so this is the best song. And when you see the material that's being spoken of, you can understand sometimes or maybe why that is. That's for sure. Probably written in the beginning of his reign or right near the beginning of his reign, which would put it right around 965 years or so before Christ, actually. And that's how long before when Solomon took up his reign, of course, after David. Now, and one of the reasons we think that is because of how he is so pro the idea of marriage and how he seems to be in love with one particular woman also. And so we know that later, once Solomon falls, once he goes, if you want to use the verbiage of maybe Star Wars, and he goes to the dark side, as it were, he kind of takes on a lot of wives, a lot of concubines, and so forth. Well, at this point, there's reason to believe that maybe he was just simply in love with one person. We'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the Shulamite woman and describe what she is. Why does Solomon write this particular poem, as it were? Because I think he really wanted to talk about the love between a husband and his wife. And I believe that because we know that Solomon, of course, asked for wisdom. And Solomon was basically delving into the deeper, meaningful things of life. Now, last week we talked about Ecclesiastes. And at that point, I believe that was written near the end of his life. He had tried anything and everything. He didn't hold his heart back from anything, he tells us in Ecclesiastes. And of course, that led to women, wine, song, and all the rest of it, all the debauchery, all the hedonism, as it were. And that, of course, is the unbridled pursuit of pleasure. And Solomon certainly was that person. I think when Solomon was younger and thinking things wisely, marriage would be a huge building block for any society. For the idea to promote the idea of order and, of course, pleasure. So I think that Solomon was certainly cared about the idea of marriage and wanted to present it in the right way. And in that context, spiritually connecting to one another, emotionally connecting to one another, and, of course, in the physical sense, connecting to one another. All very important items for a marriage and for a society to sustain itself. And let me just say this up front. Marriage is one of those things that gets made a lot of fun of today. It's interesting how every group of people, that used to make fun of marriage and mock it and mock, the idea of a monogamous relationship between a man and a woman. Everyone was mocking it. And then in today's world, we find everybody wants to get married. The very thing they were mocking is now the very thing they want to take part in. So go figure, right? So anyway, again, the book speaks to the idea of marriage for pleasure, which is a great thing, but which really is kind of was radically wild for its time. The idea of most of the time societies didn't care a whole lot about marriage other than for the fact of procreation. You get married to have children. And so many of the ancient societies, that's the way they lived life. That's the way they practiced things. To the Greeks and even to the Romans to another extent, you would marry various women. You would have women that were for pleasure only, and then you would have women that would bear children. This is the woman that's going to raise my children. This is a woman almost like a concubine that's strictly for pleasure. And so the scriptures present it as, no. This is the model that we use to make sure that we're promoting the idea of caring and commitment and all the other things that go with it also. So this is I just want to give you a brief summary of what the Song of Solomon is, and we'll go right through it very quickly. This Sunday, we'll break it down a little bit more. This is a dialogue, this poetry, and the use is in a dialogue, and it's sort of a narrative is what it is. And this happens between the husband, you could say he's the king, Solomon, and his wife, who is referred to briefly as the Shulamite is what it is. And the book can be divided into 3 sections. The first one would be the Courtship, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3 and verse 5. Then we see the wedding, that's chapter 3, verse 6 through 5, verse 1. And then we watch the maturation, as it were, of the marriage. And of course, that's chapter 5, verse 2, and then through chapter 8 is what that is. So the Song of Solomon begins before the wedding, as it were, and the bride, as it is betrothed to her husband. Now, we don't use the word betrothed. It's sort of like the engagement period, a little bit more binding in the sense that when you were in a betrothed period, it's not like you could not in that betrothal period, very simply. In an engagement, even though it's painful, you can still sort of walk away. In fact, a lot of people break off engagements because they realize this is not the person that I really want to marry in our society today. And that time in a betrothal, to break it off was almost like divorcing. It was very close to it. The only thing you didn't do in that period was you did not have physical relationships. Many cases in the betrothal period, you did not even see the other person until the wedding day. That whole time, the girl would be learning how to be a wife and a mom from her mother. And that young man that was going to marry her, well, he's learning about being a husband and a dad from his dad. They were usually separated from one another until they came together. Usually, not always, but usually. And so the idea of this love was to come about in a more natural way. They really believed at that time the love wasn't based on necessarily the emotion and the feeling of it. They believed that love was based on the choice, and each day you choose to love. Now listen, I'm not some stoic kind of guy here who's against the idea of emotion. Emotion's wonderful, and the right emotions brought about in the right context are beautiful. They're a wonderful energy to be brought into a relationship. But you do not base a relationship on emotion. You guys well know this. If you've been married, you stood across from one another and you felt really great and you looked really great and everybody was happy. There's a wedding and a reception afterwards and all things are great. But you know Monday's coming eventually, and you're going to look at each other in the true light of the day. You're going to look each other at what you really are. that's when you start to say, okay, I am choosing to be in this relationship. I am choosing to love this person. Very much the same way that, Jesus Christ said, I chose you. You didn't choose me. I chose you. The love that he displayed for us. But anyway, so the king praises the Shulamite beauty, overcoming feelings of insecurity that she had about her appearance. The Shulamite will have a dream in which she loses Solomon. She will search throughout the city for him. With the help of the city guard, she finds her beloved. She will cling to him, making sure that he is safe. She is safe. Upon waking, she repeats her idea that we don't want to force this, and we're coming into this naturally. On the wedding night, husband again praises the beauty of his wife. This is all through the Song of Solomon, by the way. And then what we would look at as highly symbolic language, the wife will invite her spouse to partake of everything that she has to offer. They make love at that point, and God blesses their union, which I think is a beautiful, wonderful picture. The scripture covers everything in the human condition, even the act between a husband and a wife, and in a very tasteful manner, but certainly in a way that there leaves no doubt on what is going on there. Not goes, but what is going on there. And they go through a difficult time in it, and they see that in another dream. The Shulamite rebuffs her husband. He will leave, but overcome with guilt. She searches the city for him, and certain things happen and so forth. And so we see it all going on. As this song ends, by the way, both the husband and wife are confident and secure in their love. They sing of the lasting nature of true love, and they yearn to be in each other's presence. So it's very much this beautiful up and down kind of give and take, pleasurable, searching narrative of Hebrew poetry, which is again really, really wonderful. So that's the basic story of the Song of Solomon. Now, theologically speaking, in the Song of Solomon, it really is centered on basing what we would look at in praising marital intimacy. And that's important because it's important, again, for society, and it's important for foundational understanding of who we are and how God has used that from the Garden of Eden to create not only intimacy, but to create social order, to bring this society together. Where you have strong marital relationships, where it is celebrated, it is guarded, it is held up as sacred, you will see societies that thrive. But where it is diluted, where it is mocked, where it's ridiculed, you will see the very fabric of a society going into chaos. We live in a world of chaos because we have no understanding of what love really looks like biblically. We don't understand God's definition. We don't understand God's examples of it because we have allowed ourselves to be deluded into thinking that it is not between one man and one woman. And we've lowered our guard, even as the church, we've lowered our guard. And the world then the enemy presents a corrupted view of what love really is all about, to where it's presented to be, if you just have love for another person, then you should be able to marry or be in some kind of intimate relationship for just simply feeling something for another person. Well, you understand that's detrimental to society is what it is. It pulls at the very fabric of stability. So God has designed it between a man and a woman for very specific reasons. That's what it is. And so in this book, we see the establishment, the understanding of what that's about. Certainly enjoyment with one another, not only for procreation. Procreation's an important part. Many of you, if you're a little bit older, you were raised to believe, well, it's about procreation. Well, it certainly is. It's about having children, no doubt about it. And but it's also about the enjoyment between a husband and a wife. And in fact, to the point where Paul says that we should not deny one another of these things, of this physical pleasure. That's for sure. Now, again, according to the first verse of Song of Solomon, written by Solomon, we know that. Again, he wrote over 1,000 songs, and this is his best song, is what it is. It's assumed, based on 1 Kings 4 and 32, that it was written early again in Solomon's reign. So it talks about this Shulamite woman. Let's just take a moment to talk about that. Shulamite is said to mean that because she comes from an unidentified place. This is one theory. Just let me give you this. This is one unidentified theory, and it's a place called Shulam. Many consider that the Shulamite to be synonymous with a Shulamite. Again, a person from, as it's said here, is Shunem, is where they think she may be from. This place called Shunem. It's a village in the north of Jezreel. If you've been to Israel, we've been there a few times, the Jezreel Valley, right near Mount Gilboa. And some other scholars think this idea of Shulam is also synonymous with Salem. So Solomon, his name, of course, being a derivative of the idea of peaceful, that would make his wife also with that derivative of peaceful, and using that. And so, and it's only after she's married to her king that she's referred to that. And so others believe she's the daughter of Egypt's king, whom Solomon would marry, but there's not necessarily any evidence of that. There's a lot of speculation on who this is. Another speculation points to a young Shulamite who served King David in his old age. It's plausible that we know her as Abishag, as the Shulamite. We know that she was from Shunem, which could be the same place as Shulam, also as David's personal servant. Abishag would have known David's son Solomon. Solomon's half-brother, by the way, Adonijah, attempted to have Abishag as his own wife, and Solomon prevented this union because he wanted to be married to her. So who is this woman, this Shulamite woman? And four possible interpretations. We have an allegorical interpretation. This view sees the descriptions of love as a picture of the love between God and his people, and then between Christ and his church. And this was very common among the early church and in the Middle Ages. And so anyway, was it right? Who knows? I mean, it's just one of the theories that's sort of out there. So the first one being, again, the allegorical. The second one is known as the Anthology Interpretation, and that views the Song of Solomon as a collection of poems and lyrics, and they're all arranged around this common theme of intimate love between a man and a woman, celebrating love's longing, ecstasy, joy, beauty, and what goes into that. This understanding rejects the idea that the book contains a narrative plot. In other words, there's really no narrative. It's just a bunch of different thoughts put together. I think if you read through the book, you will see there's a definite narrative that runs throughout the book. So we don't really hold to that. There is an interesting hypothesis. It's called the shepherd hypothesis around this book, and it was popular back in the 17 and the 1800s. It says the Shulamite woman and the shepherd boy are two peasants and are in love, and King Solomon is seeking to win this woman into his harem. The woman ultimately resists Solomon's flattery and returns home to marry the shepherd. I find that interesting. I find it to be kind of the Princess Bride sort of all of them, and just, silliness, but there it is. And then there's the Solomon Shulamite interpretation. This is probably the most common today. It's a story about King Solomon and the Shulamite woman, and the outline would go like this. First of all, the lovers are yearning for one another. We see that 1 verse 2 and 3, 2, 3, 5. Then we have a wedding, chapter 3, 6 to 5, 1. Then we see the separation, the reunion, 5 and 2 through 6 and 3. And then delight in each other, 6 verse 4, 8 verse 4 through there. And then the final affirmations of love, chapter 8 through through to the very, very, very end of all of it, verse 14 there in chapter 8. And so anyway, you get an idea of the differences in the way it's interpreted, and being that there's a lot of allegory, it's poetic and so forth. I do believe that I believe there was a true Solomon. I believe there was a true Shulamite. I believe that they truly were in love, and I believe all those things happened as it says. But I also believe, again, the interpretations that there were other things that were coming along in that narrative, in that story, that we speak of in a spiritual way also. So once again, just like a lot of the Bible, there's a lot of the interpretation that's there, but you can take away from this, and please do. And that is simply this. You are the bride of Christ, and He loves you, and He has pursued you, and you are in relationship with Him. One day we will be reunited with Him. One day we will have the Feast of the Lamb, where we will all gather around the marital table, and we will spend 7 years in glory with Him after we are raptured out, and that is to get to know our groom, that we get to spend time with Christ at that point. At the end of those 7 years, we will then come back with Him to this earth as He sets up His millennial kingdom, His 1,000-year reign, and we will reign with Him for 1,000 years as the bride of Christ, and He is our King, He is our groom, is what He is. And so very much in the same way that you interpret the allegory of a marriage, the marital end of things, is the same way we also look at our relationship with Christ. I hope you've enjoyed that. There's a lot to it. There's a lot more to it. We're going to get into some of that and talk a little bit, but I hope, and my prayer for you is that you will understand how deep, how wide God's love is for you. Be blessed, and we'll see you Sunday.